Hello and welcome to Winchester Student Union's Officer Elections and to our candidate Q&A session. So my name is Tiff Burnett and I'm the Student Engagement Manager at Winchester Student Union. I'm also the Deputy Returning Officer for the elections and I will be hosting the Q&A session this evening. So tonight we will be releasing a 4-part pre-recorded Q&A with all your elections candidates and these will be split into each officer role available, starting first with your presidential candidate. So this Q&A will give our candidates the opportunity to answer questions which have either been pre-submitted by our members through our Ask a Candidate online form or drawn from our Union Big Survey. Before we begin the speeches, here are the candidates running for president this year. So we have Charlotte Baker and we also have R.O.N, who's running as a valid candidate in all of our elections. This stands for Reopen Nominations and you can choose to vote for R.O.N as your first or second preference in this election. So, Charlotte, your first question this evening is: how will you ensure that students know about the student union and the work it does to support, engage, and represent them? And what can be done to better connect with students?
So I think this is something that I'm kind of covering in my manifesto for this election, which is student voice and communication. I think more can be done to reach students in different ways, whether that be kind of social media, whether that be with a newsletter, whether that just be going out and talking to more students on campus and kind of getting their raw feedback then. Um, and equally, I think there's the whole thing again about having a kind of like an open door policy, making sure students can come and speak to you about any kind of issue that they're experiencing. Um, so I think that's the main kind of ways, is making sure that the union has a vast varieties of ways of feeding back, but different ways that might suit different students. And I think that kind of second bit and what can be done to better connect with students, I think is about reaching out. Um, I think something that a lot of people have been guilty of before is kind of letting students come to them, whereas I think it's important that we kind of like go out and we talk to them. That's something that I want to do, and making sure I'm getting that raw student feedback.
Lovely, thank you. So, how will you work to engage and represent all student demographics across all areas of the union? So, not just your typical full time undergraduate student aged kind of between 18 and 21.
So this is kind of going off the back of what I just said in terms of getting the feedback in different ways, because then you can kind of, the more feedback you receive about what different people are experiencing, the more you can kind of act on that. um, so I think there's that. There's also acknowledging that I'm no longer a student either, so, and I wouldn't have been a student for 2 years if I was to be re-elected. So I think it's important that you kind of acknowledge that times have changed and that there's different cohorts want different things. So that's the main thing, I think, is about making sure the students feel they can come and talk to you about what they've experienced and what they want to change. But this is also something that I've really wanted to work on this year in my first term as president. Um, in, I introduced R.O.N Winchester, which is a kind of online portal community, which is about representing the Winchester community as a whole. And there's stuff in my manifesto about increasing the work of that, and hopefully that will include doing more kind of outreach with different demographics, making sure that everyone feels represented and part of the one community in Winchester.
Thank you. So, your next question has been submitted to us by a creative writing student who wants to know: how will you support disabled students during your time in office, and how will you ensure that this support continues after you leave?
This is something that's really interesting because when I first came to Winchester, so I looked at the campus in like 2018, 2017, 2018. And obviously the biggest thing about Winchester is it's on a hill. It's not the most accessible place ever, and I think that everyone can realise that it's a beautiful, beautiful campus, but it isn't accessible, and it's more kind of like, what more can we be doing to make it as accessible as possible? And at the time, I was with my mum who was in a wheelchair, and there's something that I noticed as a student was that I was acknowledging the fact that this was a difficult place to move around. So I completely understand my privilege there, um, that I'm not a disabled student, so I don't know what that feels like. So I'd love to hear from students about what they need and what they can, what even little steps would help them support them. So I think that's my biggest thing, is about creating some sort of feedback forum or type form, or just thing that people can submit, whether that's something that's incorporated into R.O.N Winchester to help support students on kind of things that might be struggling with. There's the bigger stuff that's like more structural that can be changed, but there's also lots of probably of smaller things, and just maybe the way that certain things can be done just to make life a little bit easier for those students. But obviously I would love to hear, so that I can bring it up to other powers in the university and make some changes.
Lovely, thank you. So, your next question is: the cost of living crisis will continue to affect students in the coming year. How will you support students facing cost barriers?
So when I came into office last year in July, it was me that was straight away saying to the university, what are we going to be doing about this? Because I could see from kind of looking at the sector that this is something that was really going to start to affect students. And then um, it was kind of myself and fellow officers lobbying the university to get some information out to students about what they were doing. And then this year, obviously, as a student union, we've done stuff like the cost of living hub and the bookcase, which is something that I helped to create, as well as I've introduced clothes drives. So there's already a lot that I've already done. But then in my manifesto, my main first bullet point is about doing more for that. So I'd like to get more money back into students' pockets. Um, I'd like to keep championing and pushing for lower costs across the board. Um, I've also done some other work that I'd like to finalise and finish. Um, I'd like to do more regionally and nationally towards what I can learn and also that I can do to help students more nationally with cost of living, as well as work with forums like NUS to make sure that I'm putting my voice in it as a student leader to get more for students. And also, I'd love to set up a cost of living task force next year. Um, so that students and the university staff can all come together and share like what maybe things that we might not have thought of before that are affecting students and ways that we can support with that.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. So, the next question is kind of a scenario. So, you've just come out of a meeting where you've advocated for students in relation to an increase in emergency support funding. You feel that this is a vital issue for students. However, it does seem unlikely that this is going to move forward. What are your next steps?
So I think firstly is acknowledging, is it really the end of the line here? Like I think looking and basically saying, right, okay, maybe this bit's not working, but who else can I go to? Who can I kind of, because I think that's part of it. It's part of thinking it's not just a one and done. If you think it's vital, then keep pushing for it. And then if it really is the end of the story, then I think then it's more about, okay, like what smaller steps can I make to maybe go towards this or help support students in another way. So say if it was funding, then look at what funding already exists and how that can be used and how that can be rolled out in a different way. I think it's really important to not just drop something. It's important to keep kind of pushing and going for it if that's what you feel that students need.
Lovely. So, next up, what will you do to further the union's environmental and sustainability work?
So obviously I've kind of mentioned I think sustainability ties a lot into cost of living, which is great. And I'd like to do more kind of in terms of like car boot sale kind of stuff. So I helped introduce clothes drive this year, but I'd like to do more maybe about like hobby drive or like a book swap. Just more stuff about people sharing their different things. So that's one thing. And also in my manifesto, I've written that I'd like to introduce sustainability sessions. So this is kind of similar to the cost of living forum. It's a way of creating a group twice a semester where students can come together and share maybe sustainable or environmental practices that they've seen or things that they'd like us to do either at the union or the university, and then we can create a list of recommendations to the university of what they could be doing. We can look at costs, kind of what that would mean. And that just means that we're making little sustainable efforts, and more so, especially as we're on such a beautiful campus.
How will you make it easier for students to speak up and be heard?
I think this kind of goes back to the first question, which is about communication and outreach. I think it's important that you go to those students and that they feel comfortable to come to you. It's about having that open door policy, that students feel that they can come to their president and they can say anything that they need to say. Um, sorry, I think it's also just about understanding the union. I think that's something that really it needs to be pushed in the early part of the semester about understanding the union, what it does, what it can do for you as students, signposting them to correct places. And also, I think it's like using schemes that are already in place, like with the student academic rec scheme, and making sure that students fully understand how that kind of works and that they can be represented through that, but that they also, as president, I'm elected as one of their leaders and that they can come to me about anything. So I think that kind of ties into the first question about getting the feedback and the student voice and communication all kind of in tandem.
Lovely. So, your last question this evening, Charlotte: what do you consider to be the most pressing need in terms of the student experience right now, and how do you plan on addressing it?
So I think there's a few things. Firstly, there's obviously the cost of living crisis, which I think is just going to continue and maybe even transform in different ways for students next year. So I think it's about working on that and doing more for that. We are a smaller university, but that doesn't mean that we can't do more for students. So I think that's one thing. And also learning how that kind of is going to affect students in different ways. The second thing I think is student loneliness as well. This is something that I think starts kind of early when you come to Winchester in terms of when you first come to university, you have that freshers week that's like everything, and then it kind of dies off a bit. So I think it's about keeping that up, and I want to work with the university on that with their transition program to make sure that they're keeping that up. Um, and then the other thing I think is student engagement and student isolation, creating those memories and those friendships. I think this is possibly something that's been post COVID. That's there is that anxiety there. So helping to support students and how we can get them involved as much in university life as possible, so they can get the most out of it.
Lovely. So that brings us to for the candidate questions in the election of Student Union President. So thank you very much to Charlotte, and thank you for watching part one of our candidate Q&A online. Thanks also to everyone who submitted questions in advance. If your question wasn't answered, we have posted a link to Charlotte's candidate page in the comments of this video, so you can find out more from her there and check out her manifesto for more. On our elections page of our website, you will also find more information about the elections process overall, as well as the candidates running in this year's election, remembering that R.O.N. Reopen Nominations is a valid candidate that you can vote for in each of our elections. So voting opens tonight at 9 p.m. You can check your Unimail email address, which is where you will receive a direct link to cast your vote, or you can also visit our website, winchesterstudents.co.uk/vote. So that draws us to the close of part one of our candidate Q&A. Do stick around as we will be uploading part two very shortly, where we will be hearing from our Vice President Education and Welfare candidates.